Some nights arrive softly, as if the world has learned how to walk without making a sound. Maybe you are lying down in a quiet room, the ceiling above you fading into a gentle blur. Maybe you are sitting in your car in Chicago with the engine off, letting the city's distant hum become a faraway ocean. Maybe you are stretched out in bed in Bangkok, listening to the air conditioner breathe. Or maybe you are moving slowly through Copenhagen at 3 a.m., the streets rinsed clean by winter air, the lamps painting small circles of gold on wet stone. Wherever you are here now, and that is enough. If it feels right, let your shoulders drop a little. Let your jaw unclench. Notice the weight of your hands. Notice the simple fact that you do not have to hold the day up anymore. The day can rest. You can rest. Tonight, I want to take you somewhere calm and quiet, somewhere that smells faintly of paper, cotton gloves, and time itself. A place where stories do not shout, they wait. It begins under an old building in London, in a part of the British Museum that most visitors never see. Not the bright galleries and polished floors, but the steady, climate-controlled rooms behind locked doors. Down there, the air is cool and measured. The lights are soft and practical, like the lamps in a library after closing. Rows of drawers sit in tall cabinets, box after box, tray after tray, each one labelled in calm, tidy handwriting, and inside, resting like small, sleeping stones, are clay tablets, more than anyone could count in a single lifetime without growing old along the way. Some are whole, the size of a hand. Some are broken, only corners and slivers. Many are the colour of warm earth after rain. Some are pale with salts from long burial, and some are darkened by ancient fire, the kind of fire that strangely preserved them. If you listen carefully in this imagined vault, you can almost hear tiny sounds. A drawer sliding open, felt padding shifting, the faint tap of a label being set back into place. You can hear the hush of a person working slowly, respectfully, as if the room itself might be sleeping. And here is the gentle mystery that will guide us tonight. Among these shelves, a researcher once noticed a small cluster of fragments, pieces brought out of the ruins of Nineveh long ago, excavated in the 19th century, hastily catalogued, and then set aside. They sat in storage like that for decades, maybe longer, while the world above them changed languages and fashions and clocks. The fragment that drew attention was not large, just a few inches across, a broken edge, a shallow curve, a handful of lines still readable, little wedges pressed into clay like bird tracks in soft mud. Only a few lines, and yet within them a phrase that did not fit neatly into anything else. It was the kind of phrase that makes the mind lift its head a little. Then, in a good bedtime story, settle back down again, curious but untroubled. A line that when translated could be heard as, "When the Anunnaki made war upon the Anunnaki." Not a battle against monsters, not a clash with chaos. Something quieter and stranger, like a family dispute grown too large, like a council that can't agree, like a sky full of clouds that cannot decide which way to drift. Tonight, we won't chase fear. We won't dramatize the dark. We'll hold that phrase the way you might hold a smooth stone you found near a river, with curiosity, with gentleness, with the understanding that it is old, and you are safe. We will walk slowly through the questions that naturally arise, using the calm rhythm of who, what, when, where, why, and how, not like a test, but like lanterns set down one by one along a quiet path. Who were the ones writing these marks? Where did their world begin? When did their stories get pressed into clay? What did they believe they were recording? Myth, memory, warning, or all of them at once? Why did certain lines get copied again and again, like lullabies passed from hand to hand? And how did a soft whisper from ancient rivers find its way to you here tonight? Before we drift deeper into tonight's gentle journey, remember to subscribe to Ancient Sleep Story. Here, you'll always find peaceful stories that soothe the heart and quiet the mind. Where are you listening from tonight? Leave a comment. Your presence adds warmth to this quiet corner of the night. And since we're here together, let me ask you something. Slowly, kindly, with no pressure to answer out loud. Did you ever walk through an old street or building and feel that someone, long ago, once stood where you are now? That feeling, that soft overlap of footsteps across time, is exactly what these tablets can bring. Because the clay does not merely hold words, it holds hands. It holds the shape of a reed stylus, the small angle of a wrist, the patient breath of a scribe who leaned close to the damp surface and pressed each mark with care. Imagine that scribe for a moment. Not a dramatic figure, not a hero with a sword, just someone seated near lamplight late in the day. Perhaps the air outside is warm, perhaps the river breeze carries the smell of reeds and mud. The scribe's world is practical. Grain must be counted, canals must be maintained, temple stores must be recorded. And yet, in between lists and contracts, they sometimes copy stories that feel like deep water. Stories of beginnings, stories of floods, stories of councils, stories of the sky. In the vault, the modern researcher turns the fragment gently under a light. The wedges catch tiny shadows. The surface is not smooth, it is the texture of dried earth. And in that texture is a whole geography, the flat marshlands where two great rivers once braided through fields, the city walls rising slowly out of mud brick, the temple courtyards swept clean each morning. When we speak of Sumer, we are speaking of a land shaped by water and patience, where the Tigris and Euphrates move toward the Persian Gulf, and where the horizon can feel endless. It is hot in summer, and the ground can be both generous and stubborn. There is little stone, little timber, and yet cities rose, irrigation channels were dug, communities organized themselves around temples and schedules, and the steady labor of hands. And then one day, long before any of us were born, someone decided to press language into clay so it could outlast breath. That choice is so tender when you think about it. To write is to say, I am here. I saw this. I want you to know. Over time, the marks became a script, cuneiform, wedge-shaped signs that could carry law and poetry and prayer. It could carry myths, yes, but also measurements and lists of barley and the names of kings. It could carry the kind of information that feels almost boring, until you realize that boredom is often the signature of truth. Ordinary details are how a world proves it was real. The tablets in the vault are full of that ordinary reality. They speak in the calm tone of administration. This was delivered, this was owed, this was built, this was repaired. And then sometimes they shift, just slightly, into something else. A line that sounds like a remembered dream. A name that returns like a refrain. Anu, Enlil, Enki, Inanna. The Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came in one common rendering, names that appear across texts like stars, repeated in different constellations. In some stories, they are divine powers. In others, they are rulers with territories and responsibilities, as if the universe itself had departments, water beneath the earth, storms in the air, justice under the sun, the moon's gentle watch. And in the middle of all that, somewhere between the lists and the hymns, there is a recurring sense of something dividing. Before the flood, after the flood. Even the way time is spoken seems to change there, like waking up from a long, vivid dream, and trying to explain it in daylight. Tonight, we don't need to argue with the past. We don't need to decide with sharp certainty what every line really means. We only need to listen. We can let the questions be soft. Sometimes the most healing thing is to be allowed not to solve. If tonight's story brushes against a beautiful memory, an old hallway, a childhood book, a museum visit, the smell of rain on warm stone, feel free to share it below. Here, no one rests alone. Every story from the past is a lantern in the dark, gently lighting our way tonight. And if this first step brought you calm, you can leave a gentle comment for yourself, like a small note tucked into the margin of time. So we will move like a visitor in a museum after hours, slowly, with wide, gentle eyes. We will touch nothing that should not be touched. We will simply stand close enough to feel the quiet. And as we do, notice what happens inside you. The day's noise begins to thin out. Thoughts that were running in circles start to slow. Your breathing finds a steadier rhythm, because the past, when held gently, can become a lullaby. It reminds the mind that time is large and that you do not have to carry everything alone. Soon, we will follow the fragment's whisper back through the vault, back through Nineveh, back through rivers and reeds, to a city called Shurupak, where, in one old story, a god speaks not to a person, but to a reed wall, as if secrecy itself prefers soft surfaces. But for now, we stay a moment longer in the vault. The drawer is open, the fragment rests on dark foam. The lamp above it makes a small island of light. And the night outside continues to be kind. The drawer stays open for a moment longer, and in that small island of lamplight, the fragment seems to have its own weather. Soft shadows, tiny ridges, a quiet sense of distance. If you want, take one slow breath in and let it out as if you are gently fogging a window. In this place, nothing is hurried. Even curiosity moves on padded feet. The researcher in the vault does something very simple. They look, and then they look again. They tilt the clay a few degrees, the wedges brighten, then darken. A few marks that were nearly invisible begin to separate themselves from the surface, as if the tablet is willing to speak, but only in a whisper. Fragments like this often arrive in the museum like pebbles from a long river journey. They were lifted from soil where they slept for centuries. They were cleaned, numbered, boxed, and shelved. Sometimes they were studied right away. Sometimes they waited through wars, through the changing of governments and currencies, through decades of people coming and going above them. Drinking coffee, taking trains, falling in love, growing old. And when a fragment waits long enough, it gains a special kind of calm. It stops trying to be important. It simply becomes what it is, a piece of earth that remembers. This particular cluster had once been part of a library, one of those ancient libraries that were not made of paper, but of clay. The room had burned long ago, and the fire that ruined the roof also hardened the tablets, baking them the way a kiln bakes pottery. It is one of history's quiet ironies. Destruction sometimes makes memory tougher. The city connected to those shelves of clay was Nineveh, sitting near the Tigris River, in what is now northern Iraq. In its time, it was vast, loud, ambitious. Stone lions guarded gates, walls stretched like horizons. Courtyards held the footsteps of messengers and soldiers and scribes. But tonight, we won't walk Nineveh at noon. We will walk it at dusk. Imagine the light lowering over the river. Imagine the heat releasing slowly from bricks. Birds settle into trees. Smoke from cooking fires rises in thin threads. Somewhere a dog barks once, then becomes quiet again. A person closes a wooden door. A lamp is lit, and in a room where shelves are lined with clay, someone is copying a story. Not inventing it, copying it. This matters because copying is a kind of devotion. It is a way of saying, this is worth carrying forward, even if I do not fully understand it. Even if it is older than my grandmother's grandmother, older than the oldest man in my street, older than the city itself. The scribe's hands are steady. Their stylus is a cut reed, its tip angled into a small wedge. They press, lift, turn, press again. The clay accepts every touch. If you have ever written a note to yourself, on paper, on your phone, on the back of an envelope, then you already understand the heart of this moment. Because writing is not only information, writing is comfort. It is a small promise that something will not be lost. In Mesopotamia, in the lands between the rivers, that promise had a particular weight. The rivers could be generous, and they could be wild. The fields could bloom and then crack with thirst. Empires rose like walls and fell like walls. People learned to measure and build and store, to keep record so that grain did not vanish, so that labor could be shared, so that a city could breathe through seasons. So a great deal of what survived is practical: receipts, inventories, rations, contracts, letters that sound like life itself. Send the barley. Repair the canal gate. Tell my mother I am well. And then, among these ordinary lines, there are the stories, myths, hymns, laments, words meant to be spoken aloud or remembered or repeated until they became as familiar as the path from home to the river. Tonight we will let the stories be gentle. We will let them be slow. If it helps, imagine you are in a small scribal school in Idaba, where students learn by copying lines again and again. The room smells of wet clay. The teacher speaks softly, correcting a sign, smoothing a surface, guiding a hand. Outside you can hear the city's distant murmur, the steady rhythm of millstones, the splash of water in irrigation channels, the call of someone selling dates. Nothing urgent, just life continuing, one breath after another. And then, in the midst of all that continuity, the tablet fragment offers its strange little phrase, war upon the Anunnaki. Even if we don't rush to interpret it, it carries a feeling. It suggests that the most ancient stories were not always about an outside enemy. Sometimes they were about tension within the house, within the council, within the very forces that were supposed to keep the world balanced. If you've ever had a day where your own thoughts felt like they were arguing with each other, you might recognize the shape of that idea. One part of you wants to push forward, one part wants to stop, one part wants to control everything, one part wants to let go. And when you lie down at night, those parts sometimes keep talking. So tonight, as we follow these ancient whispers, we'll do it with kindness for ourselves. We'll remember, even the oldest myths noticed the noise inside, and they tried, in their own way, to lull it. To understand how, we need to drift farther back, past Nineveh, past the grand walls and the famous library, into the older landscape that fed these stories. A flatter world, a world of reeds and mud and water that moves slowly, like thought before speech. Picture the southern marshes where the rivers spread into a lacework of channels. The land is low and the sky is wide. Reeds sway in the wind. Water reflects the moon in broken pieces. Insects sing their small, constant music. A boat slides through almost silently. In such places, the boundary between solid ground and water is never absolute. You can step onto a patch of earth and feel it tremble. You can look at the horizon and see smoke and not be sure if it is a cooking fire or a distant storm. This is a landscape that teaches the mind to be patient, and in a patient landscape, stories grow long roots. Now, very softly, we come to a city that appears in more than one tradition, Shurupak. Not because it needs to be proven on a map tonight, but because it feels like a doorway in the imagination, a threshold where the ordinary world tilts toward the mythic. In the old flood story, Shurupak is the hometown of a man who will be warned, a man who will build, a man who will listen. But even that warning is not delivered like a thunderclap. It comes in the gentlest way possible. A god, Enki, the one associated with fresh water, wisdom, and hidden currents, does not speak directly to the man. Instead, Enki speaks to a reed wall. Think of that, a wall made of woven reeds, the kind used in marsh houses, a wall that can breathe with the wind, a wall that rustles faintly at night, as if it is always listening anyway. Enki chooses that wall because it is private, because it is close, because it is the kind of surface that holds secrets without turning them into spectacle. And maybe, too, because speaking to a wall is a way to speak without breaking the rules of a divine council, without announcing rebellion, without making a declaration that would wake the whole world. Just a whisper, pressed into the weave of reeds. If you like, imagine the scene. It is late, the air is warm but softening, the river is near enough to smell. The house is quiet. Someone inside is preparing for sleep. The reed wall stands in the dark, gently shifting as the night breeze passes through. And then the voice comes, low, careful, intimate, not a shout. Not a command that cracks the sky. A voice that knows the power of calm. Far away, in the museum vault, the modern lamp hums softly. The researcher's pencil pauses because the lines on the fragment have opened a door, and behind that door is a room of reeds beside a river that still flows in the world's memory. It is a tender thing to realize that a bedtime story can travel like this. From reed stylus to clay, from clay to dust, from dust to a drawer, and from a drawer to you. If your mind tries to race ahead, asking what happens next, let it slow. Tonight, we don't need to solve the council's arguments. We only need the feeling of a message passed quietly, like a cup of water, offered in the dark. Who is being warned? A human with ordinary hands. Where does the warning land? On a wall that can breathe. When does it arrive? In the hour when lamps are low. What does it sound like? A voice kept small for safety. Why so gentle? Because gentleness can be courage. A wall of reeds. Listen to me. As the words settle into the room, they do not raise fear. They create focus. They narrow the world to a single, simple act, paying attention. Because sometimes the most important message in any story is not loud. It is the one you have to lean closer to hear, and that is what we will do next. We will lean closer. We will listen to the reed wall, this humble, breathing boundary between inside and outside, receive a secret that will become one of the most enduring images of human memory, a boat, a storm, a life preserved. But the first step is not the flood, the first step is the whisper. And in the quiet house at Shurupak, the reed wall listens, as if it has been listening all along. The reed wall listens, and the night around it does what night always does, softens the edges of everything. If you're still awake enough to notice your breathing, let it become a little slower. Not forced, just slower. Like a boat easing into a calm current. In the old story, the whisper to the reed wall is only the beginning. But before we follow the warning any further, we can take a gentle step sideways, back into the world that made such a whisper feel natural. Because a reed wall is not just a poetic detail, it belongs to a real landscape. It belongs to the lands between rivers. When people say Mesopotamia, they are describing a place held between two long, living lines of water, the Tigris and the Euphrates. These rivers are not quiet in the way a lake is quiet. They move. they shift, they overflow, they change their minds. And for thousands of years, human life learned to move with them. Imagine standing on a flat plain where the horizon is wide and uninterrupted. The sky can feel enormous, the sun can feel close, and the ground, so often dry, dusty, cracked, can transform after the river's flood into a dark, soft skin of fertile silt. This is where Sumer grew, not as a single country with a single capital, but as a cluster of city-states, Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Eridu, Nippur, each with its own temple, its own fields, its own canals, its own pride. In a world where stone was rare and wood scarce, people built with mud brick, layering it patiently, repairing it patiently, trusting that continuity is a kind of strength. And the canals were everything. If you close your eyes for a moment, you can picture them. Long, narrow channels cut through earth, lined with reeds and trampled banks, water sliding through, carrying life into fields of barley, small gates that could be opened or closed, workers with baskets and shovels, a rhythm of maintenance that never truly ended. The canal is a beautiful thing for a bedtime story because it is both practical and meditative. It is a human-made river, quiet proof that even in a harsh landscape, people can create softness. Who dug them? Ordinary hands working in groups. Where did the water go? Into fields, into gardens, into the city's beating heart. When did the work happen? Season after season, year after year. What did it require? Patience, cooperation, and attention to small details. Why was it sacred? Because water was not only a resource, it was a blessing. How did a city survive? By learning the river's language and answering it gently. In Sumer, that answering happened in temples as well as in fields. Temples were not only places for prayer, they were also storehouses and workshops and administrative centers. Grain came in, wool went out, labor was organized, offerings were counted, festivals were scheduled. The temple was a kind of calm machine, one that ran on ritual and on record-keeping. This is where clay becomes important again, because when a city's life is tied to canals, and canals are tied to schedules, and schedules are tied to harvests, you need a way to remember. You need a way to hold the shape of agreements so they don't dissolve in the air. So people pressed marks into clay. At first, the marks were simple, little pictures, little tokens. But over time, the pictures became signs and the signs became a script. By around the late 4th millennium BCE, people in southern Mesopotamia were using cuneiform, wedge-shaped writing that could capture not only numbers and goods, but names, prayers, stories, and dreams. It may help to imagine the act itself, a small lump of clay wet enough to yield, shaped into a tablet, a reed stylus cut at an angle. The hand presses, lifts, turns, press, lift, turn. The rhythm is steady, almost like counting breaths. And when the tablet dries, the marks remain. In the quiet of the museum vault, those marks feel permanent. But in their own time, they were part of a living flow. Tablets made, read, stored, sometimes reused, sometimes copied, sometimes broken, sometimes saved by accident. One of the gentlest truths about the ancient world is that it was full of paperwork. Not in the boring sense, but in the sense that life was carefully tracked. The past was not only remembered through stories, it was also remembered through lists, and this is where the divine names return. There is another kind of tablet that sits quietly in this same world, a list of kings, not a list meant to excite, but to organize memory. A line of names, some familiar, some faint, arranged like beads on a string. And in that list there is often a soft, dividing mark, the time before the flood and the time after. The before can feel dreamlike. The reigns stretch out as if time itself was slower then, like a night that feels endless when you are half asleep. And the after becomes more ordinary, more human in scale, as if the world has woken up and started counting again. Tonight, we don't need the numbers. We only need the feeling of that transition, from mythic time to measured time, from vastness to the steady pace of days. It is the same transition you feel when you drift from a vivid dream back into morning light, carrying an emotion you can't explain. And perhaps that is the hidden tenderness of these tablets. They show that ancient people also lived between two kinds of time: the time of work and meals and canal gates, and the time of stories where meaning stretches and folds. If your mind has been busy lately, you may recognize this too. There is the time of emails, errands, schedules, and there is the time of the heart, where a memory can last an hour, and an hour can pass like a breath. So when we read a line about councils and whispers and divine tension, we can read it as history, yes, and also as a soft map of the inner world. If it helps, you can let your eyelids grow heavier as we go. You don't have to stay with every detail. The story will carry you the way a river carries a leaf. Anu was the high sky, remote, overarching. Enlil was the air, the storm, the authority that moves between heaven and earth. Enki, also known later as Ea, was the deep, sweet water beneath the ground, the wisdom that flows unseen. And Inanna was the bright force of love and power, the morning star and evening star, the restless pulse that makes cities feel alive. To modern ears, these names can sound dramatic, but in their own setting, they could feel as familiar as weather. If the river rose, you thought of Enki. If the wind sharpened and the sky darkened, you thought of Enlil. If the stars were clear, you felt the distant calm of Anu. If the city's streets filled with music and desire and ambition, you sensed Inanna. These names gave people a way to speak to the world, especially when the world felt larger than their control. And now we return to our small phrase: war upon the Anunnaki. When you place it beside the canal work, beside the temple records, beside the careful rhythm of writing, the phrase begins to feel less like a Hollywood battle and more like a mirror of something human. Because even a well-run city has conflict, even a council has disagreements, even a family of powers has seasons of tension. Sometimes the conflict is not loud, sometimes it is administrative, quiet, slow, a clash of duties, a difference in priorities. If you've ever lay awake at night replaying a conversation or weighing two choices, you already know this kind of war. Not with swords, but with thoughts. So the story's divine counsel can be heard as a way to name inner weather. One voice says, keep order. One voice says, protect life. One voice says, let the flood cleanse. One voice says, whisper a warning. And the reed wall becomes the soft place where mercy can happen without announcing itself. There is something deeply comforting in that image, because it suggests that even inside a system, whether a divine council or a human institution, there can be a small path of kindness, a narrow channel like a canal through which gentleness can still flow. And perhaps that is the real reason these stories survived. Not because they were sensational, but because they carried emotional truth in symbolic form. They were a way to say, the world can be noisy, but there are quiet rooms. There can be storms, but there can also be guidance. There can be tension, but there can also be a soft hand on the shoulder saying, build, prepare, rest. If you want, let your mind picture the canals again. Water moving through a gate at night. Moonlight broken on ripples. Reeds whispering. A city sleeping. The reed wall in Shurupak is made from the same reeds that line those canals. It is the same landscape, just closer, warmer, more intimate. And now, in that intimate darkness, the whisper continues. It becomes a set of instructions, not frantic, not sharp, but careful. Build a vessel, make it strong, seal it, bring what matters, bring life. We are not yet at the storm. We are still at the planning, the patient preparation, the human act of turning fear into craft. In the next part, we will walk beside the builder, slowly, quietly, feeling the texture of wood and rope, the smell of pitch, the calm determination that comes when you stop arguing with the night and simply begin. For now, let the rivers remember for you. Let the clay hold the words. Let the reed wall keep listening. In the story's quiet house, the whisper does not rush. It arrives like water seeping into dry ground, slow, steady, undeniable. If you like, let your breathing follow that rhythm, in and out, as if your ribs are a gentle bellows warming the night from the inside. The man who hears the message is often called Atrahasis in one tradition and Utnapishtim in another. You don't have to hold those names tightly. Tonight, they can be like soft labels on museum drawers, helpful but not heavy. What matters more is the shape of the person, a builder, a listener, someone with ordinary hands and an alert heart. He lives near the river. He knows the sound of reeds rubbing together in the wind. He knows the smell of mud brick after rain. He knows the way a city changes at dusk, how voices dim, how lamps appear one by one, how the air cools just enough for sleep to feel possible. And on this particular night he hears a warning that is also a kind of kindness, not a trumpet, not thunder, a careful instruction tucked behind a reed wall. So very gently the next day begins. The sun rises over the flat land in a pale wash. The river is there, as it always is, carrying reflections of sky and birds. The city wakes into its routines, grinding grain, opening gates, lifting water, exchanging greetings that sound like the same greetings from yesterday and the day before. And the builder wakes too, quietly, as if he is holding a secret in the center of his chest. This is one of the most calming parts of the ancient flood stories, if we let it be calming, the long, patient section where nothing dramatic happens yet, a section of preparation, of craftsmanship, of attention. If you have ever done something with your hands to soothe your mind, cooking slowly, folding laundry, sanding a piece of wood, watering plants, then you already understand this part of the story. You understand how the body can carry the mind toward calm. Who builds? A human guided by a whisper. What is built? A vessel, a home that can move. Where is it built? Near water, near reeds, near the smell of earth. When is it built? In days that look ordinary from the outside, why is it built? To preserve what is gentle and living. How is it built? With measured steps and with patience. In some versions, the instruction includes dimensions and plans. In a sleep story, we don't need the numbers. We need the feeling, a design that is thoughtful, not frantic. Something like a boxy boat, stable and solid, meant not for speed, but for safety. So the builder begins to gather materials. He walks through the market at a slow pace, feeling the morning heat beginning to rise from the ground. He smells fresh bread. He hears the soft clink of pottery. He nods to people who know him, not because he wants to talk, but because he wants to remain ordinary. A secret is easier to protect when you carry it gently. He trades for timber, where he can find it, for reeds, for rope. He collects pitch, dark, sticky, sharp-smelling, because he knows what water can do to an untreated seam. He collects tools, he checks them twice, he sharpens blades, he tests knots. When he returns to the building place, the river is close enough to hear. It speaks in small sounds, a lap at the bank, a splash from a fish, the soft clicking of insects near the reeds. a heron lifts from the shallows, slow as a thought, and becomes a line against the sky. He chooses a spot that feels right, ground that is firm enough, near enough to water to launch, but not so close that a sudden rise would steal the work away. This too is wisdom, not fighting the river, but respecting its moods. Work begins. Not with panic, with structure. Posts are set. Frames rise. Reeds are bundled. Ropes are wound. The air fills with the scent of cut fibers and sun-warmed wood. Each day has a rhythm, each evening has a pause, and all around him the world keeps doing ordinary things. A canal gate creaks open somewhere, letting water slide into a field. A child laughs, then is called home. A potter turns a wheel, shaping wet clay the way a scribe shapes wet tablets. In the temple district, priests pour small offerings, water, beer, grain, into bowls, as if reminding the gods that humans are always trying to keep balance. Sometimes, before he begins his work, the builder stands for a moment at the riverbank and watches the current. He doesn't stare like someone seeking answers. He watches like someone learning a mood. He lets the water teach him what it always teaches: move, but do not hurry. If you want to settle deeper, imagine that quiet watching. Imagine the feeling of not needing to solve anything, only needing to be present. Sometimes he works alone. Sometimes, in some tellings, he hires others, offering them beer and bread, making it sound like a festival project, something communal, something harmless. People laugh and they carry beams, and they do not know they are helping to build a cradle for the future. And here, quietly, is a soft discovery. In these ancient myths, survival is rarely a solitary act. Even when the story names one hero, the work is often shared. Hands appear, communities move. The world is held together by cooperation, not only by power. If you are listening tonight with a tired mind, let that land gently. You do not have to carry everything alone. Even if no one sees your effort, the effort can still be shared in invisible ways, through kindness, through small routines, through the quiet support of others. Now there is an older layer in the Atrahasis tradition, one that can sound loud if told sharply, but can feel surprisingly familiar if held softly. It says that the world grew noisy with human life, mills turning, voices calling, work continuing into the night. The gods, so the story says, could not sleep. Tonight, we don't need to treat that as accusation. We can treat it as metaphor. Because haven't you felt it too? The noise of the mind, the endless movement, the to-do list that keeps walking through your thoughts when your body is trying to rest. If you've ever wished the inside of your head could become quieter, you are not alone. Even the oldest stories noticed that longing. So the builder, as he works, becomes the opposite of noise. He becomes a craftsperson of silence. Each measured action is a vote for calm. As the vessel takes shape, he returns often to the reed wall in his mind, as if checking the message again. Not because he doubts it, but because repeating it keeps him steady. Build, seal, prepare, bring life. There is a tenderness in the word seal. In the ancient world, sealing meant keeping water out, yes, but it also meant making something whole, closing the tiny gaps where trouble can seep in, creating a boundary that protects what is inside. So he warms the pitch in a shallow basin. The sun helps, fire helps, the pitch becomes glossy, pliable. Its smell is strong like earth and smoke and something almost medicinal. With a flat tool, he spreads it along seams, smoothing it slowly, stroke after stroke. The black layer catches light like wet stone. The work is repetitive, and repetition is soothing. If you want, allow your eyelids to soften as you imagine this. The same motion, again and again, like waves brushing ashore. No surprises, no sudden noise, just a craftsperson and the quiet certainty of doing the next small step. He tests the ropes with a patient pull, feeling how fibers answer tension. He ties knots the way you might tie a small ribbon on a gift, secure but gentle. He checks the frames with the flat of his hand, listening for creaks. He adjusts what needs adjusting, and he does not punish himself for what isn't perfect. He simply corrects, the way a scribe smooths a tablet and writes the line again. At night, he goes home. He eats. He drinks water. He listens to the city settle. He hears distant singing from somewhere, then silence. He lies down. He looks at the ceiling. He thinks of the river, and sometimes in those nights his mind becomes a counsel. One voice says, this is impossible. One voice says, keep going. One voice says, what will people think? One voice says, it doesn't matter. One voice says, protect what is gentle. One voice says, rest. He learns slowly to let the loud voices fade and to follow the quiet one. The quiet one sounds like the reed wall. The quiet one sounds like water. Day by day, the vessel becomes more complete. It is not beautiful in the way a ship with a sharp prow is beautiful. It is beautiful like a well-made room is beautiful, square, sturdy, practical, calm. And as it stands there near the bank, it begins to feel like a promise, not a promise that nothing hard will happen, because life has never made that promise to anyone. But a promise that preparation is a form of love, a promise that when change comes, you can meet it with steadiness, a promise that gentleness can be engineered, built, sealed, and carried forward. Soon, the builder will begin to gather what matters, not treasures, not trophies, but living things. Seeds, animals, family, the ordinary miracles that make a world. But tonight we stay with the building, with the scent of pitch, with the warmth of sun on timber, with the sound of rope tightening, with the slow confidence of hands that do not tremble. And as you listen, you may notice your own inner weather calming, because this is not a story about destruction in the first place. It is, quietly, a story about care. In that care, the night finds you and lets you drift safely now. The vessel stands near the river like a calm thought made visible. In daylight, it looks almost plain. Sturdy walls, clean angles, rope lines drawn tight. But in the softer hours, when the sun lowers and the air turns honeyed, it begins to feel like something else entirely, a portable room, a floating shelter, a promise shaped by patient hands. If you're listening with heavy eyes, you don't need to picture every beam. Just hold the feeling. Something safe, something prepared, something that doesn't hurry. And then, as the final seams are sealed, another gentle phase begins. Not the storm, not the drama, the inventory. In the ancient world, inventories were everywhere. Clay tablets recorded barley and oil, wool and fish, dates and beer. They listed rations for workers, deliveries to temples, distributions to families. It was not romance, exactly. And yet, there is a strange tenderness in it, because to list something is to admit it matters. To record is to say, this has weight. This will not be forgotten. So the builder does what his world has taught him to do. He makes a list with his body. He gathers with care. Who will go inside? What will be carried forward? Where will each thing rest so it stays calm? When will it be brought in so there is no rush? Why these things and not others? How can the living be arranged gently like objects in a warm room? He begins with what is quietest. Seeds. Not a treasure chest, not gold, not stones carved for kings. Seeds, small, dry, ordinary, and full of invisible futures. He brings sacks of grain that smell like sun and dust. He brings bundles of herbs wrapped in cloth. He brings kernels saved from the last harvest, the kind a family keeps in a clay jar in the cool corner of a house. He touches each container as he sets it down, not as a ritual for show, but as a private promise. You will have a spring again. If you want, let your breathing slow with that thought. A spring again. A season that returns, a cycle that does not panic. Then come the tools, a simple blade, a wooden mallet, a woven basket, a small jar of oil, a coil of rope. The things that let ordinary life continue, the things that do not sparkle but do not fail. Sometimes the builder pauses and listens. The city is still busy. People call out. A cart creaks, a dog noses around a doorway. Somewhere a reed flute plays a few notes, just enough to remind the evening that music exists. He keeps his movements unremarkable because a quiet mission is protected by quiet behavior. And then, slowly, the living begins to arrive. In the stories, animals are often mentioned, but tonight we will treat them with softness. Imagine not a stampede, but a calm procession. A pair of goats led by a rope, their hooves clicking gently on packed earth. A basket with birds inside, the faint rustle of feathers. A small pen made of reeds for animals that need a boundary to feel safe. The builder speaks softly because softness is how you tell a creature it can trust you. He offers water. He offers handfuls of grain. He moves at the speed of breathing. A curious thing happens when you move that slowly. The world tends to meet you there. Even a nervous animal will pause and listen and decide that it is safe enough to step forward. If tonight your thoughts have been skittish, jumping at shadows, rehearsing tomorrow, imagine speaking to them the way the builder speaks to the animals, quietly, patiently, without scolding. It's all right. You can rest now. I will watch the door. Some versions of the old stories include craftsmen, neighbors, workers who help load the vessel. Perhaps they are paid with beer and bread. Perhaps it is framed as a feast, a construction project, a communal task that feels harmless. Here is another soft truth hidden in plain sight. Even when people don't know the full reason, they still show up for each other. They still lift, they still carry, they still tie knots and bring water and laugh in the sun. Community can be unconscious kindness, and kindness, even when it isn't named, leaves a warmth behind. Now the builder turns to the people closest to him, family, friends, those whose presence makes a room feel steadier. We don't need a long list of names. Tonight, they are simply faces in lamplight. A hand placed gently on a shoulder, a shared bowl of food, a quiet agreement that whatever comes, they will move together. If you're listening alone, let this line settle in you like a blanket. Here, no one rests alone. Even if you don't hear another person breathing nearby, you are part of a long human line, people who have lain awake, people who have worried, people who have tried to prepare, people who have searched for a soft way through the unknown. The builder steps inside the vessel and looks around. It is dimmer in here, like the inside of a barn, like the inside of a large clay jar. The air smells of pitch and wood and living breath. He places water containers in a corner. He sets food in a place that stays cool. He checks the ropes again. He checks the seals. This is the moment where a story could turn loud, but we keep it quiet, because the most dramatic thing in this room is not danger. It is attention. Outside, the sky changes color. Blue deepens. The first star appears. The river's voice becomes more noticeable in the darkness, as if it has been waiting for night to be taken seriously. And far away, far beyond this small building place, there is the suggestion of a council. Not a scene we need to watch directly, but a feeling like distant thunder that never arrives, a meeting of forces, a debate of priorities. In some lines you can sense disagreement. One will preserve order, one will preserve life, one will keep to rules, one will bend them gently. If you have ever had an argument within your own mind between responsibility and rest, between fear and hope, then you already understand this counsel. In the museum vault, centuries later, a translator will notice how many tablets contain this subtle tension, not always named as conflict, not always described as battle. Sometimes it is only a shift in tone, a hesitation in a line, a whisper passed sideways, a reed wall, a kind warning, a secret root of mercy. And here is the tender, soft discovery of the night. The mystery is not necessarily a hidden weapon or a cosmic war or a shocking secret. The mystery may simply be this: gentleness survived. It survived in clay, it survived in repeated copying, it survived in the choice to save seeds and water and breath. If you like interactive questions, you can let one float through your mind now without needing to answer. If you could place one small, comforting thing into the vessel of your life tonight, one thing that helps you feel safe, what would it be? A photograph? A warm sweater? A note you wrote to yourself? A memory of someone's laugh? Let the answer be soft. Let it be simple. The builder too chooses simple things: a cup, a blanket, a tool, a small lamp. These are not grand symbols. They are the quiet architecture of survival. And as the last light fades, the vessel becomes a room of waiting. Waiting is not always anxiety. Waiting can be a kind of prayer, a way to stand still and let the world's large emotions pass through without breaking you. In the vault of the British Museum, waiting is the default state. Tablets wait for readers, drawers wait for hands, labels wait for meaning. Nothing rushes, everything is kept at a steady temperature, steady humidity, conditions of calm. It is strangely comforting to realize that human memory has learned how to create spaces like that, spaces where the past can rest. So tonight, the vessel becomes one of those spaces, a moving vault, a floating archive, a place where life is catalogued not to control it, but to protect it. The builder sits down for a moment. He listens to the animals settle. He listens to the breathing of his people. He listens to the river. He closes his eyes, and he does something surprisingly modern. He checks in with his body. Is my jaw tight? Are my shoulders raised? Am I holding my breath? And then he releases what he can release, because preparation is only half the work. The other half is letting go. In the next part, the world will begin to change, not with a scream, but with a shift, a wind that feels different, a silence that lingers, the sense that the river is gathering itself the way a person gathers courage. But for now, everything is inside. Seeds, water, tools, breath, quiet companionship. And you, listening now, can let your own mind become a little more organized too, not in a stressful way, but in a comforting way, like putting a book back on a shelf. If this story has brought you any calm, you can leave a gentle comment for yourself. And if you feel like sharing, you might tell us where you're listening from tonight, because each place name is a small lantern, and together they make the night feel warmer. And somewhere above the river, beyond the builder's sight, the moon rises like a calm seal on the night, almost like that old image of the tablet of destinies, not as a weapon, but as a symbol of order. In this gentler reading, destiny is simply the next small step, written without panic. Breathe, lift, place, rest. The universe does not demand that you understand everything. It only invites you to keep moving softly, one quiet mark at a time tonight. The vessel waits, the river remembers, And the reed wall, somewhere in the story's first room, continues to breathe. The vessel is full now, not full in a crowded, restless way, but full the way a pantry feels full after you've quietly prepared for winter. Full the way a room feels full when the people you love have finally arrived. Shoes set by the door, voices lowered, lamps turned down. Inside, the air carries many small scents at once. Warm wood, dark pitch, dry grain, clean water, and the soft animal warmth of living bodies settling into the night. There is a hush that isn't forced, it is earned. If you're listening with heavy eyes, you can let this hush spread into you. Let it travel from your forehead down to your shoulders. Let it loosen whatever the day tightened. You don't have to keep up with every detail. The story will hold you. Outside, evening deepens. The last merchants close their baskets. Fires become gentle orange circles. Somewhere, a reed flute tries a slow phrase and then stops, as if it too has decided to rest. And then something shifts. Not a dramatic alarm, just a change in the wind. It is the kind of change you feel before rain. A cooler breath across the skin. A quiet rearranging of the air. As if the world has turned slightly in its sleep. The builder stands near the vessel and listens. He doesn't look frightened. He looks attentive, like a person who has been watching the sky all day and has finally noticed the first true sign. Who notices first? The ones who have learned to listen. What changes first? The air. Where does it touch? The reed tops, the river surface, the skin of the evening. When does it happen? In that small hour when lamps are low and decisions are already made. Why does it matter? Because the world often warns before it moves. How do you meet it? By staying steady. He moves without haste. He checks the final lashings. He makes sure the animals have space to lie down. He speaks in a voice that does not travel far, just far enough to calm the room. If you want, imagine him placing a hand flat against the vessel's wall. The pitch is cool now, the wood is firm, the structure answers his touch with silence. It is ready. And then, with a softness that feels almost ceremonial, the entrance is closed, not slammed, closed like a book being set down for the night, closed like a curtain drawn to keep warmth in. Inside, the light is dimmer. A small lamp glows near the floor, its flame sheltered. Shadows gather in corners, gentle and harmless. Breathing becomes easier to hear. There is a moment of listening, a cough, a rustle of cloth, the quiet click of a clay jar being set down carefully. Then, slowly, the lullaby of the river begins to change its rhythm. At first, it is only a little louder, as if the current has decided to speak closer to the bank. Then it becomes steadier, like rain beginning far away. The builder presses his ear near the wall and hears water moving where it did not move before. Water is finding its old paths. In these lands, the river is never only a river. It is a living schedule, a mood, a memory. It can rise without cruelty the way a breath rises in a sleeping chest. And when it rises, the land responds. Most people outside will not notice yet. The city is used to the river's changes, small rises, small falls, a season of wetness, a season of dust. Life continues until it cannot continue in the same way. But the builder has been warned, gently. He has been given time to become calm before the world asks him to float. The wind turns again, reeds bend. A first sprinkle comes, so light, it barely darkens the dust. Then another, then a thin, steady veil. Rain in this story is not a weapon. It is a curtain. It draws itself across the landscape and softens the outlines of everything. Streets become darker ribbons, courtyards begin to reflect lamplight. The smell of earth rises, fresh, almost sweet, like the world is being rinsed. If rain has ever made you feel safe, safe enough to sleep, safe enough to let the mind stop working, then you know this feeling. Inside the vessel, someone whispers a prayer. Someone else simply exhales long and deep. The animals shift and then settle as if they have decided that this wooden darkness is a good place to rest. And the vessel moves. At first, the motion is so slight it could be imagined. A gentle lift under the floor, a slow rocking like a cradle, then another lift, and a longer roll, and suddenly the builder knows the river has taken hold. The vessel is no longer a thing beside the water. It is part of the water. Outside, the bank is dissolving into a single shared wetness. The boundary between canal and street becomes less clear. The familiar lines of the city blur, but inside the world remains arranged. Seeds in their sacks, water in its jars, tools in their place, life breathing in the dark. This is a quiet paradox. When the outside becomes uncertain, the inside becomes more important. Order is not control. Order is kindness. If you are listening from a busy apartment, or a quiet highway rest stop, or a room where the day still clings to the curtains, you are welcome here. Let the boat's motion remind you you do not have to steer every moment. Tonight you can be carried, and if a thought arrives, greet it kindly like a traveler. Then let it sit down and rest until your breathing becomes slow again. The rain continues, not in furious sheets, but in a steady persistence, like a song that repeats until you stop resisting and begin to drift with it. On the roof, drops become a soft percussion. Tap, tap, tap. A rhythm older than language. If you'd like, you can let that rhythm become your breathing, in and out, as if you are rocking with the vessel. Time becomes strange in the dark. You cannot see the horizon. You cannot count the hours by the sun. You can only measure by small sensations, the rise and fall of motion, the way the air cools, the way the lamp flickers, the way voices become fewer as people fall asleep. The builder checks the lamp and covers it a little more so it will last. He listens for any sign of panic. He hears none. He hears only the quiet resilience of beings who have accepted the rocking. He sits down and he does something that might feel familiar to you. He places his hand on his own chest just for a moment to feel the steady proof that he is alive. Maybe you can do the same if it feels comfortable. Not as a task, as a reassurance. The rain will pass. The wind will change again. The river will eventually remember where to settle. And until then, you can rest. If your thoughts begin to wander, bring them back to simple images: a lamp in a wooden room, a jar of water, the smell of wet earth, the sound of rain on a roof. These are the kinds of details that calm the mind because they are real and because they do not demand anything from you. Outside, there may be moments when the city's familiar noises fall away. The market calls end. Even the dogs grow quiet. The world is being covered softly by weather and water and night. Inside, someone adjusts a blanket, someone strokes an animal's neck until it stops shifting, and finally sighs. The builder stays awake a little longer, not because he is afraid, but because he is responsible. He listens to the timbers, he listens to the ropes, he listens to the waterline along the wall. Everything holds. And in that holding, something subtle happens in his mind. The council that once argued grows quieter. The loud voices that wanted control realize they cannot control the river. The voice that wanted to run realizes there is nowhere to run. The voice that wanted to blame finds nothing to blame. All that remains is the voice that says, "Be present." It is a relief sometimes to surrender to what cannot be forced. If your own day has been full of problems you couldn't solve, Let this be your permission to set them down. The boat is rocking, the rain is speaking, the night is doing its work. Centuries later, a scholar will trace a wedge-shaped sign with their eyes and think, someone once sat in darkness like this and trusted a structure they made. Someone once chose preparation over panic. Someone once believed that life could be carried. And perhaps that is the soft discovery we are really after tonight. Not spectacle, but the quiet technology of hope. Hope is a rope tied carefully. Hope is a jar sealed well. Hope is a lamp protected from wind. Hope is a reed wall that listens. The vessel continues to drift. Sometimes it rises and the motion is like being lifted in a dream. Sometimes it settles, and the stillness is like falling asleep in a train, rocked by the certainty of movement beneath you. At some point, the builder finally allows his eyes to close. He leans back against the wall. He lets the rain become background music. He lets the world outside do what it will. And as he drifts towards sleep, a memory returns, not of fear, but of that first whisper to the reed wall. A voice that chose softness. A warning delivered like kindness, a message that did not shout. The reed wall in his mind rustles in the wind. And in that rustle, the story invites us to one more gentle step. Because when the rain quiets and the darkness begins to thin, something will appear. Something small and bright enough to guide the next part of the journey. Not an answer to every question. Just a sign. A soft sign, like the first clear star after clouds. The rain continues for a long time, but the way we measure long changes inside the vessel. Without sun, without clocks, time becomes a gentle blur. It turns into sensation, the rocking under your ribs, the sound of drops on wood, the smell of damp air, the warmth of bodies breathing in the dark. If you're still awake, you may notice that your own sense of time has softened too. This is one of the quiet gifts of night. It loosens the mind's tight grip on minutes. Inside the vessel, the lamp grows smaller, not because it is failing dramatically, but because it is being protected, covered, sheltered, kept for necessity rather than comfort. People speak less, the animals settle more deeply. The builder listens, then listens again and learns the vessel's new language. There is a way wood speaks when it is safe. A soft creak that repeats like a familiar phrase. A steady groan when the vessel lifts and lowers. The sound of ropes holding tension without complaint. And gradually, almost shyly, the storm's voice changes. The drops on the roof become less sharp. The wind loses its edge. The rain that once sounded like a curtain being shaken begins to sound like someone folding cloth, slow and careful. Outside, the world is still wet, still rearranged, but the most urgent part of the weather is passing. And then, one morning, if we can call it morning in a world without a horizon, the builder notices a different kind of quiet. Not emptiness, not danger. A listening quiet. The vessel still rocks, but more gently now, like a cradle after the child has finally fallen asleep. The air inside feels calmer. The animals breathe in long, untroubled rhythms. Someone stirs and then returns to rest, as if their body has decided it trusts the motion. The builder shifts his weight and places his palm against the wall. He feels it, not the slap of rain, but the low, steady presence of water all around, a floating stillness. He opens the entrance a small amount, just enough to let fresh air in, not enough to invite panic. He inhales and the air tastes clean, washed. It smells like damp earth, like reeds, like the river after it has done its work. And something else, a faint brightness, not direct sunlight, but the kind of pale light that arrives when clouds begin to thin, a soft grey that tells you the sky is remembering how to open. If you want, imagine that light touching your own closed eyelids, not waking you, just reminding you there is a wider world beyond the room you're in. In many tellings, this is the moment of the bird, a small, simple messenger. We don't need it to be dramatic. We can treat it the way ancient people likely treated birds in daily life, as ordinary wonders, feathered beings that move between ground and sky without apology. The builder takes a bird, maybe a dove, maybe something else small and calm, and holds it for a moment in his hands. The bird is warm. Its heart beats fast, but not in terror, just in its own natural tempo. The builder strokes its feathers once, gently. Then he opens his hands. The bird slips into the air like a thought being released. It circles, it disappears into the pale brightness. And then the waiting begins. Waiting again, but different. This waiting is hopeful, not tense. It is the kind of waiting you do when bread is rising, when tea is steeping. When someone you love is on the way, you don't stare at the clock. You simply trust the process. Inside the vessel, people stir a little more. The air feels lighter. A jar is opened. Water is poured. Someone eats a handful of grain. Someone shares a piece of bread. No one cheers. No one needs to. The calm itself is the reward. The bird does not return. Not yet. So the builder tries again, later, with another bird. This time, perhaps a swallow or a raven. Something strong, something used to distance. It leaves with a firmer wing beat, disappearing toward the horizon that can't quite be seen. And again, the vessel waits. In a sleep story, we can slow down here, because this is where suspense can become soothing instead of sharp. The question is not, will they survive, like an alarm? The question is, how does the world reopen, like a flower? And as the builder listens, he begins to notice small details. The rocking is less restless. The water's sound against the walls is softer. Sometimes the vessel seems to pause, as if it has brushed something gentle beneath, an unseen ridge, a shallow place, a memory of land. If you are listening with a tired mind, let this be a mirror. Sometimes the first sign of healing is not joy, but less agitation, less restless thought, less sharpness, a little more room inside the chest. And then, quietly, the raven returns. In one of the most tender images in ancient literature, it returns because it has found places to perch. It has found land enough to rest its feet. It is not forced to come back. It chooses to because it still wants food, warmth, shelter, and the vessel has become home. The builder sees it, and something in him loosens. Not triumph, relief, a soft unlocking. He does not announce it like a king. He simply nods as if acknowledging what he already sensed in his bones. The world is settling. This is a beautiful moment to ask the listener, gently, kindly, another question. Have you ever felt a shift like that in your own life? A moment when you realized the worst part had passed, not because everything was perfect, but because your breath finally came easier? You don't have to answer. Let the question rest like a feather. Inside, the people begin to move with slightly more intention. They check supplies. They speak a little more, voices still low. They reassure the animals with calm touch. They gather blankets. They prepare for the next phase, the one that requires stepping out again. And yet, even now, nothing is rushed, because the world outside has changed. It is not ready to be treated casually. It needs respect. Outside, the landscape is new. Where streets once held dust, there is wetness. Where fields once showed neat lines, there is smooth brown water. Trees appear like islands. Reeds cluster in new places. The horizon is strange. Familiar shapes moved or softened. The builder opens the entrance wider now. Light spills in, pale and clean. The air is cool. The wind is gentle. He looks out. And there, far off, he sees something that anchors the mind, a line that does not move with the water, a ridge, a slope, the suggestion of higher ground. He does not call it by a dramatic name tonight. He simply recognizes it as what it is. Stability, a place where the vessel can come to rest. The idea that there is land somewhere, solid land, does something subtle to everyone inside. It changes their posture, it lifts their heads slightly, it reminds them that the world still includes firm places. This is the soft twist of the flood story when told as a bedtime tale. After so much water, it is not conquest that matters, it is footing. Footing is peace. And just as the builder senses that peace, our story begins to widen again, back toward the museum vault, back toward those clay fragments, back toward the larger question that began this journey. Because the flood is not the only division in the old texts. There are other boundaries, other before and after lines. Sometimes they are written in myths of descent, like Inanna passing through 7 gates, leaving something behind each time. Not as horror, but as a quiet metaphor. Each gate asks you to become lighter, to release a layer, to step deeper into honesty. Sometimes they are written in lists of kings that shift from dreamlike time to human time. Sometimes they are written in the tension of a council where not all voices agree. So as the vessel drifts toward land, we can let our minds drift toward meaning. What is the story really preserving? Not only bodies, not only seeds, not only animals. It is preserving a lesson the ancient world learned slowly. When life becomes too loud, the answer is not always louder. Sometimes the answer is a quieter structure, a careful sealing, a patient waiting, a soft messenger released into the sky. In your own life, your vessel might be a nightly routine, a cup of tea, a dim lamp, a familiar video, a story like this offered without demands. And if tonight's story has given you even a small sense of safety, you can leave a gentle comment for yourself. Just a few words, like a tiny tablet pressed into the clay of the internet. I was here. I rested. I breathed. The pale light grows, the water calms, the raven, dark and ordinary and wise, rests on the vessel for a moment, then lifts again, circling toward the ridge, and slowly, very slowly, the world prepares to touch ground. The ridge appears first as a suggestion, an interruption in the endless water, a line that holds still while everything else moves. The builder watches it with the same attention he once gave to the reed wall's whisper. He does not stare like someone hunting certainty. He looks like someone greeting a familiar friend after a long journey. Inside the vessel, people sense the change before they see it. The motion beneath their feet becomes slower, less circular. The rocking turns into a gentle glide. Even the animals seem to notice. They lift their heads, then settle again, calmer than before, as if they recognize the language of land. If you are listening from a bed or a couch, let your body feel that difference too, the way your muscles soften when you realize you are safe enough to stop bracing. Who finds the ridge? A small community carried by patience. What is it? Higher ground, the simple gift of stability. Where does it rise? Out of water that has rewritten the world. When does it appear? After long waiting, when the sky begins to open again. Why does it matter? Because every storm needs a place to end. How do they approach it? Slowly, respectfully, without triumph. The vessel drifts closer. The air is cool and clean, washed by days of rain. Light falls in a pale, quiet way, as if the sun is speaking softly after a long silence. The water around the hull has lost its sharpness. It is still water, still powerful, but it no longer feels restless. The builder makes small adjustments, ropes loosened here, a beam checked there. People shift supplies away from the edges. A few hands reach out and touch the wall as if to thank it for holding. Then, with a small sound like a sigh, the vessel touches something solid beneath. Not a crash, not a dramatic landing, a gentle settling. Wood meets earth. The motion becomes still enough that the body's inner rhythm can finally reset. Breath deepens without being asked. Inside, no one cheers. Instead, there is a hush, the kind that comes when relief is too private to perform. The builder waits a moment longer. He listens. He hears wind moving through reeds again. The old familiar whisper. He hears a bird call from somewhere nearby. He hears the water's edge lapping at a new shoreline, and only then does he open the entrance fully. Light enters the vessel like a warm cloth being spread gently across a sleeping face. People blink. The animals blink. Dust motes drift in the beam. The world outside looks strange but not hostile, just newly arranged. Imagine the first step onto land. A foot presses down. The ground yields slightly, damp and soft, but it holds. Mud clings to toes. A scent rises, earth, wet leaves, silt, and something faintly green. It is the smell of beginnings. The builder steps out and stands still. He does not run, he does not speak loudly. He lets the moment settle around him, the way you let a quiet song finish before you move again. If you want, you can join him in that stillness. Let your eyes soften. Let your mind stop reaching ahead. For a few seconds, nothing needs to be solved. Around him, the landscape is a wide, quiet aftermath. Water remains in shallow sheets reflecting the pale sky. Branches float near the edges, reeds lean in new directions. In the distance, a few trees stand like islands, their trunks dark and wet. And yet, life is present everywhere. Small insects hover above puddles, birds move from branch to branch. Somewhere, a frog calls once, then again. The world is not destroyed, it is simply damp, rinsed, and waiting. One by one, the others step out. They stand close together, not out of fear, but out of instinct. After so many days inside a wooden room, the openness feels almost too large. The horizon is wide, the sky is tall, the silence has many layers. So they do what humans often do when a threshold is crossed. They offer thanks. In the oldest versions, offerings are made to the gods. Tonight, we can hold that as an image of gratitude, not as a demand for belief. The builder takes a small portion of food, a splash of drink, a handful of grain, and sets it down gently. Not to bargain, but to acknowledge. Thank you, river, for carrying us. Thank you, wood, for holding. Thank you, breath, for returning. Gratitude is a calm kind of power. It turns survival into meaning. There is also another doorway in this tradition, one we can walk through without any darkness, the image of 7 gates, where Inanna, bright as the morning star, steps downward, and at each gate leaves something behind. Not a punishment, but a gradual lightening, a crown set aside, a necklace removed, a layer of certainty released. If you've ever noticed how sleep comes more easily when you stop wearing the day, when you loosen your shoulders, unclench your hands, and let tomorrow wait, then you already know the wisdom of the gates. Tonight, imagine your own gentle gates, the gate of emails, the gate of worries, the gate of plans. At each one, set something down. Keep walking, slower and softer, until nothing is required but breathing. And the night holds you safely. If you'd like a soft question to carry into your own night, here it is. What is one small thing you can thank today, even if the day was heavy? A cup of water, a quiet corner, a message from someone kind, the simple fact that you made it to this moment. Let the answer be small. Small is enough. Now, as the community begins to unload supplies, the story's larger mystery begins to circle back, like the raven returning, like a thought that keeps finding its way home, because the flood is not only an ending, it is a line drawn in memory, before and after, in the king lists, in the laments, in the copied tablets. The flood becomes a soft border between dreamlike time and measured time, between myth and administration, between the world that feels guided by divine counsels and the world that feels guided by human hands. And this is where our opening phrase becomes more interesting, not more frightening. When the Anunnaki made war upon the Anunnaki, what if that war was not only battle, but fracture? Not only violence, but disagreement? A crack inside the very system meant to keep the universe orderly. In some texts, you can sense a tension. One voice wishes to erase the noise. Another wishes to preserve the living. One insists on rules. Another finds a quiet loophole. The reed wall whisper is mercy moving sideways. If you have ever felt torn between two duties, between work and rest, between control and compassion, you know this counsel intimately. It lives inside the human chest. It speaks in the voice of insomnia. And the soft discovery is this: peace comes when the loudest voice stops trying to win. On the ridge, the builder seems changed, not triumphant, settled. He begins to do what humans do best: rebuild rhythms. A fire is made carefully, using dry reeds and saved tinder. Smoke rises in a thin, honest line. Water is boiled. Food is shared. Animals are guided to a patch of ground where they can graze. Seeds are checked, jars resealed, tools laid out. It is ordinary work, and that ordinariness is the healing. Because ordinary work is how the world returns. In later stories, there are rules and promises and symbols, rainbows in some traditions, agreements in others. In Mesopotamian versions, the imagery can be different, but the emotional shape remains. The universe recommits to balance. Tonight we can interpret that commitment in a gentle way. The storm does not get the final word. The final word belongs to continuity, and continuity is quiet. As the community settles on land, the builder looks back once at the vessel. It has served its purpose, but it remains as proof that care can be built, that a structure can hold a frightened world without turning fear into cruelty. Centuries later, the same spirit of care will live inside scribal rooms. Students will press wedges into clay and copy these stories again. Not to frighten children, but to teach them what endures: preparation, patience, shared labor, and the strange mercy that can exist even inside a conflicted council. In the museum vault, the modern researcher closes a drawer softly. The fragment rests in its tray, returned to a stable darkness. Temperature steady, humidity steady. The tablet does not need to shout, it has already survived. And here is the twist that remains gentle like a lamp behind a curtain. The greatest secret is not what the gods fought about. The greatest secret is that the memory stayed, pressed into clay, shelved in a library, buried in dust, saved by fire, found by careful hands, and carried quietly into your night. If tonight's story has given you a softer breath, consider leaving a gentle comment for yourself. It can be simple: I'm here, or I'm safe, or I'm listening from, and then the place where you are, a small lantern on the map of this shared night. On the ridge, the fire crackles lightly. The sky clears further. A few stars appear, calm and distant. The people settle into sleep, not because every question has been answered, but because the ground beneath them is firm again. The builder lies down near the warmth of the fire. He watches the stars the way a scribe watches wedge marks, patiently, without forcing meaning. He lets the universe be large. And somewhere far away in time, a reed wall rustles again, reminding us that the gentlest messages often travel the farthest. In the next part, we will return to the clay itself, into the laments, the libraries, and the strange tablet of destinies that can be read not as a weapon, but as a metaphor for order, the way a universe and a mind can become quiet enough to sleep. Night on the ridge becomes gentle routine. The fire burns low, not as a signal, but as warmth. The air smells of damp reeds and clean ash. Somewhere nearby, water gathers in a shallow pool and reflects the stars in broken, trembling pieces. The community sleeps in a loose circle, close enough to feel safe, far enough to breathe. And in this quiet after, the story begins to fold back toward its first room. The room beneath the museum, the drawer, the fragment, the small wedge marks waiting under lamplight. Because the flood, for all its vastness, is only one of the ways ancient peoples spoke about imbalance and return. It is a great wave in the narrative, yes, but it is not the only current. There were also laments, soft, repeating poems of loss and rebuilding. There were omen texts, careful observations of the moon and sun, written not to frighten but to find patterns in the sky. There were myths of descent and ascent, stories that taught the mind how to let go, how to become lighter, how to come back. And there were, quietly, documents about authority, about who holds the right to speak, and how order is carried from one hand to another. In some traditions, that symbol is called the Tablet of Destinies. Tonight, we won't treat it as an object of battle. We will treat it as a metaphor that feels almost tender, a tablet that represents the universe's calm paperwork, the gentle filing system of reality. A reminder that even chaos has borders, and even storms eventually receive a stamp that says, "Finished." If your eyes are heavy now, you can let this idea float through you without trying to grab it. You don't need to understand everything. You only need to feel that the world can be held. Who writes order? Hands that press marks into clay. What holds authority? A tablet, a seal, a remembered rule. Where does it live? In temples, in libraries, in the stories people repeat. When does it matter most? When life feels loud and uncertain? Why do symbols endure? Because they soothe the mind's hunger for stability. How do we meet them tonight, like visitors in a quiet archive, walking slowly? Back in the British Museum storage, the modern researcher moves through aisles with a small cart and a careful list. The climate is steady, the lighting is warm but not bright. The air has that particular museum smell, paper, dust, cotton, and something faintly metallic from drawers and locks. They stop at a cabinet, open it, and slide out a tray. The tray holds fragments that once belonged to one long tablet, or perhaps to several tablets that sat side by side on a shelf thousands of years ago. In this moment, the difference between then and now feels like a thin veil. The same act repeats. A person leans in, quiet and patient, asking the past to speak gently. The wedges are small, but their shadows are deep. Each mark is a tiny decision. Press here, angle there, lift, turn, press again. The mind of the scribe is present in the rhythm of the signs. And as the researcher reads, they begin to notice something that is easy to miss if you rush. The ancient texts often contain hesitation, not in the sense of sloppy writing, but in the sense of layered voices. A counsel that is not fully agreed, a story that has been copied and adjusted, softened here, sharpened there, depending on the city, the temple, the era, the school. That is what living tradition does. It breathes, it changes, it argues quietly with itself across centuries. So when we hear a line like when the Anunnaki made war upon the Anunnaki, we can hold it as evidence of that breathing tradition, not a headline, a glimpse into complexity. It is almost comforting in a strange way to realize that even the oldest stories admit disagreement. They do not pretend the universe is simple. If you have ever felt guilty for not having a single, clear answer about your own life, about what you want, what you should do, what matters most, let that guilt soften. The ancients also lived with multiple voices. They also carried inner councils. Sometimes a story shows the gods as tired of labor, as if the work of shaping rivers and fields and boundaries had worn them down. Sometimes it shows the younger gods complaining, restless, and overheated, like workers at the end of a long day. And sometimes it shows a solution. Humans are made to share the work, to take up tools, to dig canals, to keep the temple schedules moving. In a bedtime telling, we don't need to judge it. We can read it as an old way of naming an everyday truth. Life requires effort, and effort can become exhausting, and exhaustion can make any mind less kind. Have you noticed that in yourself? That when you are tired, your thoughts become harsher, your patience thins, your world feels louder. If so, you are human in the most ancient way. So perhaps the war among divine forces is also a mythic portrait of fatigue, of systems under strain, of voices that stop listening. And then in the midst of that strain, the story plants mercy, Enki whispering to a reed wall, bending the rules with softness, a loophole made of kindness. The researcher's pencil pauses again. In their notebook, they write a translation, then rewrite it, trying to choose words that don't sharpen the mood unnecessarily. They understand something you may understand too. Language can either wake the mind or soothe it. So they choose calm words. They treat the past as fragile glass, not as a weapon. In another drawer nearby are tablets that speak of the sky, lists of stars, notes about planets. Signs that begin with, "If the moon is eclipsed." The scribes who wrote these were not trying to terrify their children. They were trying to reduce fear by naming patterns, because when you can name something, it becomes less monstrous. An eclipse becomes a schedule, not a curse. A storm becomes a season, not a punishment. A drought becomes a cycle, not a betrayal. And in that effort to name and measure, you can feel the same deep human desire you might feel today when you check the weather before bed, or look at tomorrow's calendar, or set out your clothes so morning will be kinder. Preparation is a lullaby. Some nights the scribe who watches the sky sits on a rooftop beside a bowl of water. The city below is quieting, and the water in the bowl holds a small, trembling moon. The scribe notes the moon's shape, the color of its edge, the way clouds move like slow animals across its face. They do not do this to predict doom. They do it to feel less alone under so much vastness. In the same way, you might look up from your screen and notice one patient star, and for a moment your worries shrink to their true size. The sky does not fix your life, but it widens your breath. The ancients knew that, and they wrote it down so the night could quietly remain gentle. If you want a gentle exercise right now, you can try this. Imagine you are putting your worries into labeled drawers, the way a museum does. Worry about money, into one drawer. Worry about health, into one drawer. Worry about relationships, into one drawer. Worry about tomorrow, into one drawer. You don't have to solve them tonight. You only have to store them safely until morning. The ancient world did this with clay. A thought that might have been restless in the mind becomes calm when it is pressed into earth and set on a shelf. The shelf is patient. The shelf does not argue. On the ridge, long ago, the builder watches the night sky. Stars are clearer now. The storm has polished the air. He sees a thin crescent of moon, and he thinks, perhaps without words, about how the moon disappears and returns, how darkness is not permanent, how cycles are trustworthy. This is where the story's soft philosophy begins to bloom. Civilizations rise and fall, but the impulse to rebuild returns. Rivers change their course, but water keeps seeking the sea. Councils argue, but mercy finds a quiet path. Night deepens, but the body remembers how to sleep. You may notice something simple as you listen. Your body is already doing the oldest human skill. It is preparing to surrender. Your muscles are loosening, your breath is slowing, your thoughts are becoming fewer or softer or farther away. That is not failure, that is wisdom. If tonight's story has reminded you of a beautiful memory, an old museum visit, a childhood book about ancient worlds, the sound of rain on a roof, feel free to share it below whenever you're ready. And if you don't feel like typing, that's also perfect. Even silence can be a comment in the heart. Back in the vault, the researcher closes the drawer again, slowly. The tray slides in with a soft, padded sound. The cabinet clicks shut. The fragment returns to darkness, to steady temperature, to safe waiting. Waiting is what it does best. And perhaps that is the most comforting final detail of this part. The past is not demanding your attention. It is simply available, like a lamp you can turn on when you need warmth. Tonight, we have turned it on briefly. In the next part, we will step closer to the heart of the soft discovery. Not a battle, but a transition, how the stories begin to suggest a world where divine voices fade and human hands become the main builders of meaning. We will walk through that shift gently, like crossing a quiet bridge at night, and we will let it carry us toward the deepest calm of the ending. For now, stay with the image of the tablet that holds the sky. A small piece of clay pressed by a reed, holding a universe of whispers, steady, patient, and kind. The drawer closes, the cabinet rests, and the vault returns to its steady hush, like a long inhale held gently, without strain. If you are listening with half-closed eyes, you can imagine that hush spreading into you. A museum hush, a library hush, the kind of hush that tells your nervous system you are safe. You can stop scanning the dark. And now, as we step deeper into the meaning of the fragment's whisper, we arrive at a subtle turning point, not an explosion, not a confrontation, but a soft shift in the way time is told. In the oldest layers of Mesopotamian memory, the gods are close. They walk through canals and temples. Their names appear in hymns, the way weather appears in conversation. The world feels guided by voices above and below. But as centuries pass, quietly, inevitably, the stories begin to change. Texture. The gods are still named. Rituals still happen. But in many texts you can feel something gently moving, a world where divine presence becomes less direct and human responsibility becomes more central, not as punishment, as maturation, like a child learning to walk without holding a parent's hand. Who changes not only civilizations but the way people imagine guidance? What shifts? Authority, meaning, and the weight of human hands. Where does it show? In myths, in laments, in the tone of copied lines. When does it happen? Over centuries, not overnight. Why does it matter? Because it mirrors how we grow inside. How do we hold it tonight? As a soothing truth, not a loss. There is a line in our earlier reflection that fits here like a soft key in a lock. The departure of the gods can be read as transformation, not an ending, a turning of the page. It's an idea that can comfort a modern listener, especially one who carries stress and overthinking, because so much anxiety comes from wanting someone else, some force, some certainty, to fix everything. When that certainty feels far away, the mind panics. But the ancient stories offer another option. Meaning doesn't vanish when guidance becomes quieter. It becomes internal. You become the builder, not of boats necessarily, but of routines, boundaries, gentle structures, safe rooms inside your own life. Think of the builder again on that ridge after the flood. The world is damp, the horizon is wide, the future is unclear. Yet he does not collapse. He lights a small fire, he organizes supplies, he checks water jars, he begins to rebuild a rhythm. That is what growing quiet looks like. Not abandonment, but a handoff. The story says, without saying it too loudly, that humans can carry continuity. And this is where the war among the Anunnaki can be read in a surprisingly soothing way. Not as sensational violence, but as the image of a system under stress. An order that cannot keep perfect harmony forever. A council that argues, a sky that rumbles, a pressure that builds. Then somewhere inside that stress, a softer intelligence emerges, Enki, the deep water of wisdom, choosing a loophole made of mercy. It is the moment when rigid order is softened by compassion, and that too is a handoff. Because compassion is one of the most human forms of divinity we know. It is the ability to bend without breaking, the ability to preserve life even when rules are heavy. If you have been hard on yourself lately, if your inner counsel has been harsh, this is a good moment to let the story do something healing. Imagine Enki's whisper not only as a mythic event, but as the quiet voice inside you that says, "Be gentle. You don't have to punish yourself to be responsible. You can prepare without panicking. You can rest without guilt." There are Mesopotamian laments that echo this mood, the songs people wrote when cities fell, when temples were ruined, when life had to be rebuilt from debris. These laments often repeat phrases like waves. They name grief, but they also name endurance. The repetition itself becomes a lullaby. The people mourn, the people rebuild, the wind passes, the river returns. When you hear a line repeated, your mind starts to release its grip. It stops trying to solve and begins to simply float. So tonight, if your mind is still busy, we can borrow that ancient technique. Let a few calm phrases repeat in you, like soft wavelets. I am here, I am safe, I can rest. The day is over. The night is kind. You don't have to force these thoughts. Let them come and go. Now, in the museum vault, another drawer opens, a different tray, a different cluster of fragments. Perhaps they are from another city, another century, another scribal school. Yet the feeling is the same. Clay holding quiet. The researcher sees a text that describes a council's decision, but the tone is measured. There is no shouting on the page, there is only the sense of meeting, of discussion, of outcome. That is one of the strangest things about reading ancient tablets. Even when the content is about storms or gods or fate, the medium itself is calm. Clay is unexcitable, it does not sparkle, it does not scream, it holds. And in holding, it becomes therapeutic, like a weighted blanket for the mind. In our modern world, everything is fast. Notifications arrive like tiny alarms, news updates, messages, deadlines. Even entertainment is often built on shock and urgency. But clay tablets are the opposite of that. They are slow media, they are patient, they require you to come closer, to soften your gaze, to let meaning unfold gradually. That is why they fit so well in a sleep story. So as we approach our ending, we let the story become slower still. Not because we are running out of content, but because the point of content is not to fill you. It is to empty you gently, to quiet you. Here is a soft reflection that can feel surprisingly modern. Sometimes our minds keep us awake because we believe we must be the council. We must decide, we must judge, we must control, we must forecast. We must prepare for every possibility. But the ancient stories suggest another stance. You can be the scribe. The scribe does not control the sky. The scribe does not stop the river. The scribe observes, records, and makes meaning slowly. And then the scribe goes home and sleeps. If you can become the scribe tonight, your mind may soften. You can say, I have seen the day. I have recorded what mattered. Tomorrow I can decide. Tonight I can rest. This is where the idea of the tablet of destinies becomes a gentle metaphor again. Destiny, in this bedtime telling, is not a curse or a command. Is simply the next line written carefully, the next small act, the next breath. And perhaps that is why the fragments whisper remains so haunting in a calm way, because it points to something we all experience: conflict inside a system and the need for a softer wisdom to preserve life. We see it in families, in workplaces, in nations, in our own thoughts. We have councils in our minds that debate what we should do. And sometimes we need an Enki-like voice, not to win the argument, but to whisper sideways, rest first, breathe first, seal the boat, let the storm pass. If tonight's story has brought you calm, don't forget to subscribe for more peaceful nighttime journeys. And if you feel like leaving a comment, either a place name, or a memory, or a small note to yourself, know that it helps others too. It reminds them that the night is shared, that no one is floating alone. Now, as the ridge grows quiet again, and the museum drawer closes once more, our story prepares to become even softer. We will begin to drift toward the final room, where the tablets wait in darkness, where the lamps dim, and where the mystery no longer needs to be solved. Because the final comfort of these ancient whispers is this: you don't have to know everything to be safe. You don't have to resolve every conflict to rest. You don't have to hold the whole world awake. In the next part, we will return to the vault one last time, and we will let the waiting become the lullaby that carries us to the end. Tonight, we return to the vault one more time, not as visitors chasing an answer, but as quiet companions stepping back into a room that knows how to hold things gently. If you can, let your breath slow by a single notch. Let your shoulders sink into whatever is supporting you. Let your thoughts, if they are still moving, move like distant traffic, present but far away. Down in the British Museum storage, the air is cool and steady. The floor is clean. The silence is layered. The silence of thick walls, the silence of careful temperature, the silence of objects that have learned patience over millennia. A researcher stands at a table with cotton gloves, a notebook, and a tray of clay fragments. Nothing here is dramatic. Nothing needs to be. The drama, if there is any, is the quiet miracle that these small pieces of earth have endured. Who made them? Hands with tired wrists and steady focus. What are they? Pressed memories, marks that refuse to vanish. Where did they begin? In river cities, in scribal rooms, in lamplight near canals. When were they written? Long enough ago that dates blur into deep time. Why do they still matter? Because gentleness can survive, and survival can become meaning. How did they reach you tonight? Through waiting in libraries, in dust, in drawers, in careful hands. The researcher looks again at the cluster that started our journey, the fragment with the strange line about the Anunnaki and the sense of tension inside a council. Not clearer in a way that solves everything, but clearer in a way that helps the mind relax. The text is real, the clay is real, the whisper is real, and that is enough. It is easy, in the modern world, to treat every mystery as a problem that must be solved before sleep. The mind believes it must finish the thought, close the loop, explain the line, choose an interpretation, prove a point. But these tablets were not written for speed, they were written for continuity. Their great gift is not certainty, it is duration. In the vault, duration feels physical. A drawer slides open and reveals a tray of fragments. The tray is padded. Each piece rests in its own small nest. Labels are neat. Everything is in its place, like a mind that has finally organized itself into calm. The researcher lifts one fragment and holds it close to the lamp. Shadows deepen in the wedge marks, and the signs look almost like tiny steps leading downward into the clay. Each sign is a step. Each step is a pause. Each pause is permission. Permission to go slowly. Permission to not know. Permission to rest. And that brings us to the soft center of tonight's story. The discovery that does not shock, but comforts. The past is full of disagreements, yet it still leaves us lullabies. The universe is full of weather, yet it still offers clear nights. The mind is full of counsels, yet it can still become quiet. In the Atrahasis tradition, a noisy world leads to tension among divine forces. In the flood tradition, a whisper leads to preparation. On the ridge, rebuilding begins with ordinary routines. In the sky texts, fear is softened by naming patterns. In the laments, grief is made bearable through repetition. All of it points to the same gentle conclusion. Order is not the absence of change. Order is the presence of care. Care is a rope tied slowly. Care is pitch spread along a seam. Care is a jar sealed against leakage. Care is a lamp covered from wind. Care is a story told without shouting. The researcher writes a final note, then stops writing. They place the fragment back into its tray with a softness that suggests respect, not caution. The piece returns to its small bed of foam. The tray slides into the drawer. The drawer closes with a padded sound. A lock turns quietly. And in that closing, you can feel something close inside you too. The need to keep scanning, the need to keep proving, the need to keep the mind bright. You can let that need rest. If you'd like, imagine your own thoughts becoming artifacts that can be stored, not thrown away, not denied, simply placed somewhere safe until morning. Picture a calm drawer for each category. A drawer for unfinished work, a drawer for difficult conversations, a drawer for money worries, a drawer for future plans, a drawer for old regret. Close them gently. You can open them again later when the sun is up and your breath is stronger. Tonight, you don't have to carry them in your hands. The vault teaches a kind of bedtime philosophy. The way we keep things is as important as what we keep. When we keep things with gentleness, we stop hurting ourselves with them. This is the place where a sleep story belongs. Not in the bright argument of the day, but in the soft storage of night. And so, the mystery becomes simpler. Perhaps the phrase about war upon the Anunnaki does not ask you to fear hidden battles. Perhaps it only invites you to notice that even the highest councils are not always harmonious, and that mercy still finds a way, that kindness can slip through rules like water through reeds. If your inner council is arguing tonight, you can borrow that same technique. You don't have to win, you can whisper sideways to the part of you that demands perfection, rest. To the part of you that fears tomorrow, we will meet it later. To the part of you that replays old scenes, thank you and good night. To the part of you that keeps watch, you may sleep too. Let each whisper be as gentle as the reed wall. Now imagine one last scene. The vault lights dimming after closing hours. The researcher leaves, the doors are secured, and the cabinets remain. Rows of quiet, like a forest of stillness. Inside each drawer, Tablets and fragments lie in patient darkness. They are not lonely, they are resting, waiting the way they have always waited, waiting for a reader, waiting for a translator, waiting for a kind eye, waiting for the right moment. The word waiting repeats, and in repetition it becomes a lullaby. Waiting, and nothing is demanded. Waiting, and nothing is urgent. Waiting, and nothing is lost. In that patient darkness, the clay does something almost human. It keeps its shape. Moisture leaves, hardness remains, and the marks stay sharp enough for another mind to touch them centuries later. A tablet is, in a way, a promise made of earth. I will hold this for you. And the more you sit with that idea, the more you can feel why these artifacts can soothe a modern nervous system. They are proof that urgency is not the only way to live. Think of a scribal school again, just for a moment. An edubba at the edge of a courtyard. Students seated on low benches. A teacher moving between them, correcting a sign with a fingertip, smoothing clay, encouraging patience. Outside, a canal gate creaks. A donkey brays once and then fades. Inside, the only urgent sound is the small click of reed on clay. Press, lift, turn, press, lift, turn. The rhythm is almost identical to a calming breath. In and out. In and out. If you want, match it now. One slow inhale and one slow exhale. Nothing forced. Just a gentle echo of the oldest rhythm we know. And notice how the story, even when it contains floods and counsels and omens, keeps returning to steady actions. Writing, sealing, counting, waiting, rebuilding. These are not just historical details, they are emotional instructions disguised as history. When you feel overwhelmed, return to the next steady action. When you feel anxious, return to the breath you can count. When you feel lonely, return to the small proof that others are here too. Because that is another thing a vault teaches. Every drawer is part of a larger system. No single fragment has to hold the whole story by itself. It can be one piece among many, supported, catalogued, protected. You are allowed to be that way too. You do not have to contain your entire life in one sleepless night. You can be a fragment resting in a safe tray. You can be held by routines, by community, by the simple fact that tomorrow exists. The people who pressed those wedge marks had worries too, about harvests, about floods, about family, about the noise of the world. They also looked up at the moon and tried to feel less alone. They also wanted the night to be kind. So tonight, let the kindness they left behind meet you halfway. If you are still awake, you can let your eyelids grow heavier on that word, waiting. The night itself is waiting with you, not impatiently, kindly, and if you ever want to share, you can leave a small note below where you're listening from, or what image stayed with you tonight. A museum drawer in the comments, a soft lantern for another tired mind to find. But for now, you can do the simplest thing. You can let the story close like a drawer. You can let the lamp dim. You can let the river settle. In the next and final part, we will step away from the vault, back into the warmth of your own room, and we will let the ending arrive as softly as sleep itself. An outro that does not solve the mystery, but blesses it with silence. The vault grows quiet again, as if it has exhaled. The drawers are closed, the trays are still. The labels rest in their places like calm names in a calm world. And somewhere in the building above, the city continues. Cars moving, lights changing, people living their own evenings, while beneath it all, the clay sleeps in steady darkness. Now it's time for us to leave the vault, not quickly, not with bright footsteps, but the way you leave a library late at night, softly, with gratitude, careful not to wake anything that is resting. And as we walk out into the larger night, the story doesn't demand a final answer. It offers a final feeling, a feeling that can hold you as you drift closer to sleep. That mysteries can exist without becoming threats, and that the past can be a lantern without being a courtroom. If you're still awake enough to notice your body, let your attention settle there for a moment, like a hand resting on a warm cup. Notice your forehead, let it smooth. Notice your eyes, let them grow heavy. Notice your jaw, let it unclench. Notice your shoulders, let them fall. Notice your hands, let them open. There is nothing you have to prove tonight. There is nothing you have to solve. The phrase that began our journey, when the Anunnaki made war upon the Anunnaki, can remain what it is, a whisper from a world that was complex, layered, and human in its own mythic way. It can remind us that even the oldest stories knew about inner conflict, about councils that argue, about systems under strain, and it can also remind us of something quieter and more beautiful, that mercy can still move through a conflicted world, a whisper to a reed wall, a warning delivered without spectacle, a boat built with patience, seeds carried forward, a bird released into pale light, a ridge found after long waiting, a fire lit softly, a routine rebuilt. Those are the real anchors of the story, the steady actions that turn fear into craft and chaos into a room you can breathe in. If tonight's story brought you any calm at all, you can leave a gentle comment for yourself. It can be as simple as, "I'm here," or "I'm safe," or just the name of your city, because each place name is a small lantern, and together they make this corner of the night warmer. And if you haven't yet, don't forget to subscribe to Ancient Sleep Story. Here you'll always find peaceful stories that soothe the heart and quiet the mind. Now, before we let the night fully take you, let's walk back through the story one last time, not as a summary, but as a soft drift, like remembering a dream while you're already half asleep. Imagine the museum vault again, warm lamplight, drawers sliding open, the scent of paper and clay. A fragment lies in a tray, not large, not impressive, to a hurried eye, but precious to anyone who understands time. The fragment waits. It has waited through centuries, through changes in language, through wars and rebuilding, through the long, slow rotation of human history. And it asks nothing of you. It is simply there. That is the kind of presence we need more of at night, something steady that doesn't demand performance. Now imagine the rivers, Tigris and Euphrates, moving through a flat land, carrying silt, carrying memory, carrying the patient knowledge of seasons. Imagine canals cut by hands, gates creaking open, water sliding into fields. Imagine the rhythm of work that is repetitive enough to be meditative. Press, lift, turn, open, close, flow. Then imagine the reed wall, woven, breathing, rustling softly with wind. A god, wisdom disguised as water, speaks to it instead of shouting to a crowd. The message is private and careful, like comfort offered in the dark. "Oh, well, listen." And the wall listens. This is where the story becomes an instruction for the nervous system. The safest messages are often the quietest ones. You don't need loudness to be guided. Then imagine the boat. Not beautiful like a racing ship, but beautiful like a well-made room. Seams sealed, ropes tied, pitch spread slowly. The builder does not panic. He builds. Building is what turns anxiety into motion. If you've had days where you felt stuck in overthinking, remember this. One small, steady act is often more soothing than 1,000 thoughts. A glass of water, a clean pillow, a dim lamp, a slow, breath. Then imagine the inventory, the quiet gathering of seeds and jars and living breath, a community stepping into the vessel, the world outside becoming wet and uncertain, but the world inside staying arranged. That is what calm really is, not a world without storms, but a sheltered inner room that holds even while rain falls. Then imagine the rain, tap, 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 like a lullaby on wood, the boat rocking like a cradle, the storm not as horror, but as a curtain drawn across a tired world so it can reset. Then imagine the first pale light, a bird released, waiting, another bird, waiting, and finally the sense of land returning, not as victory, but as footing, the ridge, the settling, the quiet relief that does not need to perform itself. And after that, ordinary life, a fire, food shared, tools laid out, animals guided to graze, seeds checked, routines rebuilt. The world learns to continue. This is the final wisdom the story leaves in your hands like a small, warm stone. Continuity is quiet. The most beautiful things return in silence. And so when we come back to your own night, your own room, your own breath, we don't need to force meaning. We can let meaning arrive like sleep, gently, when the body is ready. If you're still awake, try this final thought as light as a feather. You have done enough today. You can stop now. The night can carry you. Here, no one rests alone. Every story from the past is a soft lantern in the dark, gently lighting our way tonight. If you feel lonely, let that line sit beside you. Let it be true, even if only for this moment. Somewhere, another person is listening from another city, another room, another sleepless hour. And the same calm story is touching them too, like the same moonlight touching different windows. Now let the lantern become smaller. Let the museum lights dim. Let the drawers close. Let the reed wall rustle once more in your imagination, then grow quiet. Let the river settle into its slow, dependable motion. Let the boat stop rocking. If thoughts appear, don't chase them. Let them drift by like birds crossing a pale sky. If memories appear, greet them kindly, then let them rest. If your body twitches or adjusts, let it do so without judgment, like a blanket being smoothed. And if you are ready, you can allow the final mystery to remain where it belongs, in the drawer, safe and quiet, waiting without urgency. The mystery is still there. But tonight, you don't need to solve it.
Our story pauses here. Every visual and word you've experienced was assisted by AI, yet guided and perfected by sincere human emotion. We hope this harmony of history and technology has crafted a beautiful dream for you tonight. Let go and drift deep into sleep. Good night.